Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button and I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 78 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Alright, one of the reasons to quit at the end of the day is to figure things out and get your head together and make some decisions, and then you can come back, whether you quit or whether you go work on something else for a little bit, like go do something completely different. When you run up against something, take a few minutes and get your head together and evaluate the situation. Now, what do we know? We know the ends are pretty good. We know the front edge is crumbly to the point that I'm not happy with it. And we also know that the back edge probably going to be crumbly the same way because it's on the rip. It's probably going to do the same thing. We've got to cut the back edge away because right now it's about 1/4 inch too tall. So we've got to sink this line we put in here to do the rock pitch, to do the pitch face. We've got to sink that line about 1/4 inch to make this back profile the same as the other three. So the front's going to be what everybody sees, so that's the important part. And I said before, it's good to leave that for when you're really comfortable, whether it's in the middle or whether it's at the end. You know, a lot of times we'll save the dangerous work, the quality work, for midday. You usually just before lunch. If you can get an 8-hour day and you're working, you get 2 or 3 hours to warm up and really get flowing and get comfortable, and all your tools are warmed up and you're in the zone, you're feeling good, you're seeing it, you're doing it. You can really be pretty productive. After lunch, you start getting tired and it's better to move into things that are more rote, whether you're axing something or scraping or doing rough out work, and not think you're going to do your best work later on. And I may have issues with light changing in the studio. I'm up here at the front is really tough. I don't like this. I don't ever carve here because the light's awful. I get so much light by midday that afternoon it's really hard to see what I'm doing. So I usually carve back in the middle towards the back of the studio. So we know we've got to cut the back off. And I think I want to do the same thing with the front. I think I'm going to push the front back a little bit to get past these 2 known chips that I've got, because right now I've got a nice flat surface all on the front to use as a reference, where I can put my plumb blocks. And I can set plumb blocks on there, sink this till it cleans up to where I like it, to where it's good. And then I can measure that reference, using the plumb blocks and the straight edge. That's why I showed you how to use plumb blocks at the very beginning. They are so effective and so powerful and so good to use. They give you so much control, because otherwise producing that flat panel square to the ends and sunken even depth and everything and square to the joint in the top, you can do it, but it's not as simple. With plumb blocks, it's really easy. If you start making fixtures, you got to be able to adjust them, and you got to have something to reference. And I know you can put a thing on the side and measure from the... No, we just use plumb blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick all this up. I'm going to do the back first to get that together and feel good with it. And then I'm going to do the front, so the front's perfect. I'll probably push the front back about 1/4 inch. Remember back, if you can remember back, I don't know, 15, 20 videos whenever we started this, and I started trying to figure out how deep I was going to cut in order to have enough stone to break, to have a shelf, so I could pitch it, to break all this down. And I did my best to stay as far out as I could to make as narrow a shelf as I could. I didn't say, I can take 3 or 4 inches off and just blow it off. No, I want to make this as wide as we can. At this point, the interior is almost 1'8" with these lines. 1 foot 7 3/4. Okay, that die is 1'4" right now. That means we've got almost 2 inches front and back. The die is going to cut down 1.5 inches to clear those chips on the front of the joint, which means the portion of the die that sets on the joint of the die is only going to be about 1 foot 2 inches wide. So even if this is 1'7", that's still 5 inches that we've got left. We got plenty of real estate to go in another 1/4 inch. It's not going to hurt anything, because if we go in a 1/4 inch, that's going to leave us at least 1'7", and we've got 1 foot 2. That's 2.5 front and back. That's a pretty nice base. That'll do just fine for what we're doing here. So I'm going to move this stuff. I'm going to roll the crane up. I'm going to turn this on its side so I can very easily use the plumb blocks to push this face back. Real quick, the reference lines, we don't necessarily have to move this midline reference line, because you found out by using the reference lines on here, as long as the reference line is pretty straight, your pattern is going to sink into a certain depth. And on that end, we're about a 1/4 inch. On this end, the reference line was almost on the face. By doing a couple tests, one on each end, we could tell how deep it was going to be. So that's why it's a reference line. It isn't the absolute, it's a reference line. You use it, you cut it straight, you try to get it pretty true, and then you see, it will show exactly how relevant it is to the final surface that you're producing, so you can have a consistent judge versus just having rough stone and just eyeballing it and say, it looks pretty good, and then it's all wonky. We'll flip this up, I'll push this face back, we'll get really good at doing this one more time, and then after this face is perfect, we'll do the front. So hang in there and let's cut some stone. Let me show you something that I did as we're going. When the light was right the other day, I could see little shadows along this edge that I need to clean up. So I just took my pencil and tick, 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 and marked them, so that when I get back to it, I'll make sure that I try to clean those up. And I've talked about doing this before. You walk by something, you just scribble on it and mark it, and then you take care of it later. I just want to show you, this is one example of doing that. And I did a couple days ago and even forgot about it, because you just do it, it's an automatic thing. So, but they're on there, we'll deal with them later. Let's turn the stone over. Ran through the magic of video, now the stone's all stood up on edge. Got it resting on the bottom here with wedges securing it, making sure everything's nice and tight so it's really stable. And then this shelf, this is why I want to do it now. This little panel here, before I tip it down to that line, is about a plumb block wide. I can't emphasize how powerful, how useful these tools and this approach is to producing panels where you want them. Because what I'm going to do, see down here on this end, same thing on the other face, I cut about this far in. Over here, see the plumb block falls off. That's perfect. It tips right off. You just put it against the edge, it just barely sits there. So if you come out at all, it falls out. So what we'll do is we'll use a couple of plumb blocks here for our basis, and then we can measure and cut down there on the long end where it hangs out. And as long as we got a good tight fit here, then down there will be fine. And we'll cut that back. We'll probably go a little more than a 1/4 inch to make sure we come up for what I overdid here. We'll start that. We'll probably do, a few spots all the way through, and then I'll just set up my tri-square to the height that I need it to be, and we'll just go right down this and just cut it. And then we can go ahead and produce this gosher probably. And I don't know if I'll do it standing up or not. I may cut the edge in, because I got better leverage here versus going straight in like that and trying to hold it and support it. Here I can guide it better, and I've got a little better control. So we'll practice on this side. Then at the end, just take the chipper, and the little extra that we've got, I'll just chip right down the edge and clean it off, and that'll help pop this, bulge this side out. It'll be a little better volume, and should look great. And there won't be a problem with the joint. We could push the joint back to match this, but it's not going to be enough. If the joint's a little bit wider than this, all it's going to do is make it more stable. All right, back to doing another panel. when you do this work and you try to show people all this boring stuff, okay, what's going to happen, I'll pretty well bet you money, is that once we start getting into that angel, carving pretty face, pretty hands, flowing drapery, feathers, cool stuff, people are going to like seeing that. That's what they want to see. That's what they want to know how to do. They want to know how to do all the fancy stuff. They just want to go right to the fancy stuff. And they're going to skip all of this preliminary, boring, basic, monotonous, but very unforgiving work. Because you can fake a curve. You know, if I got to move her drapery over this much because of a crumbling edge, 99% of the time, nobody's ever going to know the difference. You're never going to see it. It's going to still look fantastic. You can shift all kinds. Same thing with doing the flexion on the feathers. You're never going to know that I had to change that just a little bit because something popped off or chipped off because there was a big knot or flake or spot or whatever. You're never going to see it. And this boring stuff that I'm doing now, that I've been doing for the last, umpteen videos on setting these lines up in panels and doing this and doing that, cutting reference lines, I'm sure there's probably at least one person out there that says, well, if all I have to do is tell the company that I order the stone from to run one cut down to here and one cut down to here and one cut down to here, then I'll just carve the scotia in real quick and I'll be done. I don't need him to do all that other stuff. I don't need to know how to do this. Okay. The way this edge is crumbling on the rift will crumble just as easily whether I cut this by hand or whether they run a saw cut down and it stops right here. And if all you know how to do is clean up after that big work is done and they do all of this for you through technology, just like I complain about the CNC stuff and milling it out and saying I carved a statue, you didn't. If you don't know how to do the basics, you can't do the fancy stuff. You'll do the fancy stuff, but you won't do it well. If you order this stone and had these 3 saw cuts put in and they're in the perfect place and you start cutting it off and that edge all crumbles up, what you going to do? Okay? You're going to have to probably tell the customer some fib, make up some story about there was a problem with the stone and we had to change the design because it wouldn't this or, yeah, no, you just run the scotia down to the bottom because you wouldn't know what to do. I'm showing you what to do. Learn how to do all of this because something unexpected for comments once we get to the fancy work is going to be all kinds of stuff about what all has already been covered. All of this boring stuff. How do you do that? How do you do this? We've already covered it. We've already done it. Learn to do the basics. It'll make the complicated stuff a lot easier to do well. Cut a panel. It'd be nice to cut a panel like this instead of top, sideways and everything. This would be great. All right, back to work. Set up my tri-square with my straight edge and the plumb block to get my depth. I'm going to go about 3/8 just to make sure that I've got enough clearance to get everything done the way I want it to. Start in with a ripper just inside this line, just like I was talking about. Cut around the side of the niche, leave a little area to break. Then I'm going back in with a chisel, cleaning it up. Because we got to make this line has got to be perfect, and then we'll get the rest of the panel sorted out to You got to be careful with these chisels that I use as rippers because they tend to grow. They're not as straight. When you buy a regular ripper, it's square, and there's nothing out to the side, so you can go deep with it. This you can only go about as deep as the teeth, and then you got to clean it up. But they work really great, and they're just top off and then shave it to vertical. It's important to learn to work out of position, but then when you can put it in position, if you can turn something like this, you go a lot faster. You can't always do it, and there's going to be stuff with the Angel. I'm not going to be laying her down and standing her up just all the time in order to move her around, but this will go so much faster. Corner the same way. Level it on. Then cut it away. Working on a bias with the chisel, well supported. Don't push into it. Slowly move your line out the corner. I did grab a 16 point. It'll take off a little bit smaller pieces. I don't want to put a lot of energy because we already know this is going to be crumbly when we try to cut it. So we want to try to not put too much energy. We want to do more cutting. Just push it on. Can't begin to, it's almost fun doing this work now where it's in the best position at the best level. My suction is right here. I'm clean. It's after you've done all this work where you're reaching down low and awkward, all these different positions. You know, my crane's not the most convenient crane because of how the studio's full right now. I can't just pick the stone up and leave the crane in place because it obstructs the section, so I have to roll it back and forth, and it's a lot of work. And so it's a trade-off as to if it's worth enough, if it's worth the effort to pick the stone up to move it for just a little bit. But if this was just back in the studio a little bit further, if I had more room, I didn't have this second stone, it's so easy to put the stone right where you want it and just rip this right off. This is coming off so fast compared to everything else I've done. It's so much control. It's so simple. It's fantastic. So try to work where you're comfortable. You know, get yourself set up right. And because everything from your posture to your fatigue to your suction to the tools, everything, it's just so much easier. So back to work. Whenever you're doing anything sharp, like you've got to have your chisel really sharp, especially if it involves any rough out work at all. And I've got to push, you know, a solid 3/8, you know, quarter to 3/8, depending on how deep this is, on the edge, going down about just over a quarter inch. I've got to make sure that my chisels don't chip. It's real easy to have a chip form. You have a fracture on your edge, and you'll have a flaw. And if you grab a tool without glancing at it, it dive right in with that chip. It can do two things. It can break the work, and it can break your chisel even more, because that fracture can grab, and you'll push, and you'll break a lot bigger piece off. So get used to looking at your tools, especially when you've got a really sharp tool that you're with a relatively thin edge, because they'll break. And if your stone's really hard, you've got to brick them off. Like if this is a jet black India stone, I'd want to make sure I dress these off so they wouldn't chip as easy. I'm not quite to the center yet, but I've got a real good reading all the way along here where it's just right on the end of the ruler. I tried to stay up just a tiny bit towards the center, and this is just personal preference on how I'm going to do the rest of this. I was trained to always leave a little bit of crown in the center of a panel, because if you cut it flat, it's really hard to get it flat without making it dish or concave. It's better to have a tiny bit of crown. And so this is a small panel. It's just narrow, but it's a long panel. So what I'm going to do now, I've worked from reference points that I marked on the stone with my red pencil, so I was measured from the same point. I'm going to start now on this other end and put this down and get this, have this be right on the money or a little bit deep, and work up to this, and then try to finish the center. Once I cut some more off here, I'll probably move my plumb blocks down onto this new panel fairly soon, so I can measure from that. I'll have to reset my square. Don't forget to do that, or you'll be hating the day. But then I'll have reference from this panel and get all this done. And then I'm probably going to go ahead and start working this scotia, at least cutting this edge. Now, I didn't touch my big bevel square, okay? It's really important when you're doing this type of work, if you set up something for a reference, don't just undo it as soon as you're done. Wait and make sure you're really finished with it before you do it. Even if you've got to make 2 or 3 of these because you use them a lot, you're better to have multiples that you can, you know, A, B, and C mark them or whatever. But don't just loosen this up, put it away, you know, just leave it until you're certain you're never going to need it. Because now we can go through and mark this edge again and get it really close. And obviously we're going to match it to the side when we come out on the corners to the ends. But this will give us a very good reference to start with. And really important, don't just change things. The other thing I was reminded of, when you relieve this in, because this is the rift, oh, the stone just falls right off. Or you can push your chisel through there. It cuts off nice and clean and fast. I mentioned doing a statue, just, you know, as an example, out of this piece of stone. This is one of the things you'll learn if you do much granite. A statue should be cut with head grain stone if you can. Once they get about so big, they have enough strength that there's enough mass, but most people aren't working with a huge piece of stone. So you need to get head-on end granite with the grain running vertical from the joint to the top, straight up and down. It'd be like this stone being 6 feet tall instead of 6 feet long. because the head grade on this is only about 1 foot and, I don't know what, 1.4 or whatever tall it is, I don't remember. When you're carving head-on end stone as a statue, the stone peels off really fast. It carves a lot faster than carving on head grain when you're working in. We're going to be working on this. Angel's going to be like a big die. It's going to be like head grain, so it's going to carve a little bit slower, but the stone's massive enough that it'll support it. The problem is that you know, getting head-on end stone now is really tough. So you got to work with what you can get. Getting die stock isn't a problem. So that's what I got. Carving this, you know, moving this panel down just made me think about that, and I wanted to mention it because I hadn't mentioned that yet. So back to carve. I'm on the other end now, pushed a couple spots. I want to make a little demonstration here of how to use the ripper. And this is just a chisel that's been sharpened, see if I can figure this out, with square teeth. And a regular ripper will be, 3 or 4 times this wide. But this is what it's made for, and this is the utility of it. And it gives you a very controlled way to remove stone or to lower a panel. See this, even because it binds a little bit and it dug really fast, it already popped off. But you can do this and then take it, whether it's a chisel or like a 9-point or 6-point or even a 2-blade, strip this top off. That gives me a really quick way to go about 1/8 of an inch pretty even. That gives me a way to take stone off really fast. Rippers are really, really useful, and a lot of people, especially if you're coming from soft stone, like marble, where you may not use a tool like this, with granite, they're really, really useful. And so, buy some rippers and use them. We use rippers a lot. I got to make up some real ones because carving this angel, I'm going to need them. So, back to carving. Now I can just tune this up to match both sides. Get rid of the crown and we'll be all good. And one more time, plumb block saved the day. End of the day, light's getting crappy. I know y'all complain about light. I'm doing the best I can. I'll come back and true that up a little more when I can see it better. But right now, end of the day, the sun's getting straight into the studio and I can't wait to be working further back. But that's pushed back. I'll true that up, make sure that line looks really good because the vantage is going to be looking down like this. We'll have to chip that off. I'll true this up a little bit tomorrow when the light's better. Then we'll start putting that scotia on. We should be all set. My name's Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor here at Carolina Sculpture Studio with a virtual stone carving apprenticeship, bragging about the virtues of plumb blocks. Thanks for coming in.